Grainy black and white footage flickers. The sound of wind cuts through the static, faint, cold, endless. The camera pans across a desolate landscape, broken trees, a road that leads to nowhere, and a village half swallowed by mist. There are places in war that were never meant to be found. Coordinates erased from every map, names struck from every record. Yet one winter morning, in the dying years of World War II, a German patrol boots crunching on frozen mud, muffled breathing under helmets, distant artillery rolling like stumbled upon one of them, a village that shouldn't have existed, thunder over the horizon. They had been marching for days, retreating, regrouping, searching for signs of command in a world that was falling apart. The Eastern Front had swallowed entire divisions. The radio lines had gone silent. Snow fell heavy, thick as ash, burying both the living and the dead under the same indifferent sky. Close-up of a soldier's face, young, pale, eyes hollow. His breath forms a ghost in the cold air. No one remembered who saw it first. Maybe it was Corporal Weiss, pointing through the fog at something glinting beyond the birch trees. Maybe it was Sergeant Kruger, who muttered that the road shouldn't even be there. But as they pushed forward, rifles raised, they saw roofs, chimneys, smoke, a village standing quietly in a valley that had long been marked on their maps as uninhabited terrain. Faint church bell, one single, broken toll that echoes across the snow. The men slowed. No gunfire, no movement, only silence, the kind that presses against your ears until it becomes a sound of its own. They expected resistance, partisans, perhaps Soviet scouts. But there was nothing, just an emptiness that seemed to breathe. Camera pans across shuttered windows, icicles hanging like glass knives, doors half open as if someone had just stepped out and vanished. They never expected what came next. Because in war, there are things you can explain. Orders, battles, losses. But there are also the moments that history refuses to hold. The ones that slip through the cracks of record and reason. This was one of those moments. Faint static from a broken radio, a whisper of a voice, then silence. In the years that followed, few spoke of it. The official reports were brief, inconsistent, censored, but the letters that survived, the ones hidden in boots, in coat linings, in graves, tell a story that still chills those who read them. Black screen, faint typewriter letters appear, one by one. Abandoned village. No inhabitants, but houses warm, fires still burning. This is not the story of a battle, but of a discovery, one that blurred the line between history and something else. When German soldiers found an abandoned village that shouldn't have existed. Cut 2, flickering war footage, soldiers walking into the fog, rifles at their sides, their silhouettes fading into white, slow fade to wind and static. And in the silence that followed, the war itself seemed to hold its breath, fade to black. The calm before the storm, snow sweeping across a vast, white landscape. The camera drifts slowly over the outlines of destroyed tanks, half buried in frost. A low wind hums through the wreckage, the kind of wind that carries memories rather than sound, soft, measured tone. The winter of 1944 was not a season, it was a sentence. Temperatures fell below freezing, supply lines fractured, and the German army found itself trapped in a landscape of silence. Every road led to retreat. Every forest hid eyes. The Eastern Front was collapsing, but no one told the men on the ground. Distant rumble of artillery, faint and irregular, like thunder moving through mountains. The 11th Regiment had been marching north for 3 days, guided by nothing but a fading compass and fragments of radio orders that no longer made sense. Their commander, Captain Reiner, was a man of precise discipline, one of the last officers still clinging to the illusion of order. He believed maps, not ghosts, logic, not luck. But logic began to unravel somewhere east of Kovel, when the roads turned to frozen rivers and the signs stopped matching the maps. A close-up of an old German map, edges torn, creased with frost. The camera zooms in on a blank patch. No markings, no names, only white space. They had been told the sector was abandoned, scorched earth, empty villages, all civilians evacuated months before. But as night fell on the 3rd day, the patrol spotted something strange. Faint plumes of smoke rising from the valley below, perfectly vertical, steady, as if from chimneys, not from battle. Reiner ordered a halt. 10 men crouched behind the tree line, staring down through binoculars into the fog. What they saw shouldn't have been there. A cluster of rooftops, maybe 20 houses, a steeple, and a windmill, the faint outline of a village that no one could name. The clicking of a safety catch, slow breathing, the low murmur of men exchanging glances. Corporal Weiss whispered, "Could be Soviets, sir." Reiner nodded, his jaw tightening. Could be anyone, but something about the sight was wrong. There were no trenches, no movement, no sound. Even the smoke looked too still, as if it hung in air that wasn't truly alive. Black and white shot of soldiers watching from behind trees, the fog pulsing with light from their breath. They waited until dusk. Snow thickened. The men's faces turned pale with exhaustion. And then, without a word, Reiner stood, slung his rifle over his shoulder, and signaled to move. The descent into the valley was like walking into a painting. Every tree, every branch coated in a layer of frost so dense it seemed sculpted rather than grown. The world around them lost sound, muffled by snow and stillness. They passed old signs written in Cyrillic, half covered in ice, pointing toward places that didn't exist anymore, boots crunching in slow rhythm. A faint church bell rings once in the distance. When they reached the first house, the door creaked open on its own. The air inside was warm. A fire burned quietly in the hearth. Pots sat on the stove, stew still steaming, though no one was there to eat it. Camera panned slowly across the room, chairs slightly pulled back, a coat still hanging by the door, a child's toy resting on the floor. Softly, they called out, first softly, then louder. But their voices returned only as echoes. The house was empty, yet it felt occupied. Sergeant Kruger, the oldest among them, muttered, "Maybe they ran when they heard us." Reiner didn't answer. His eyes lingered on the fire. It wasn't old. Someone had fed it recently. Outside, the other men spread out across the village. Every house was the same. Warm fires, full tables, beds unmade, boots by the door, but not a single human being. No animals, no footprints, no signs of struggle. Just a village suspended between moments, as if time had stopped breathing there. The faint ticking of a clock, steady and hollow, the kind of ticking that feels louder in silence. They never expected what came next. Private Adler swore he saw a figure move past a window in the next house, a shadow, thin and fast. The men surrounded the building, rifles raised, shouting orders into the dark. When they entered, they found nothing, except a single candle burning in the center of the room, its wax barely melted. Kruger crossed himself. No one spoke after that. A long tracking shot of the men walking through the main street, fog curling around their legs. The church stands at the far end, tall, crooked, its bell tower leaning slightly as if in pain. Inside the church, dust hung like mist. Hymn books were open on the pews. A cross lay shattered on the floor, its wooden pieces blackened as if burned long ago. And behind the altar, carved into the stone, were words in an old dialect of German. Für die niemals. Translation appears on screen for those who never left. Quietly, Reiner didn't know what it meant. None of them did, but they all felt it, the pull of something unseen. They set up camp in the town hall, too tired and too cold to move on. Night came fast, swallowing the last of the light. And as the wind rose outside, the fires inside the houses burned brighter, flickering through empty windows like eyes. Wind howling through cracks, creaking wood, the faint whisper of voices too distant to understand. Almost a whisper, in the silence that followed. The war seemed to stop at the village border. Radios hissed with nothing but static. The compass needles spun. And for the first time in months, the men didn't fear an enemy. They feared something else. Something they couldn't name. Fade to black. The faint outline of the village remains in the fog still, untouched, watching. When they realized the truth, it was already too late. When they realized visual, black and white footage flickers faintly. A snow-covered village under a pale gray dawn. Smoke rises from chimneys, though no one is seen. The sound of the wind is joined by the slow ticking of a clock somewhere, faint but steady, echoing through the stillness. Softly, reflective, morning came quietly, though no one had truly slept. The men had taken turns on watch, each one swearing he heard movement outside, footsteps crunching in snow, a door creaking shut, the faint sound of breathing just beyond the walls. But when they looked, there was nothing, only the same street, the same houses, the same fog curling like smoke from unseen fires, the faint hum of a broken radio, static fluttering like distant insects. At dawn, Captain Reiner ordered a head count. 10 men entered the village the night before. 10 were accounted for, yet something felt wrong, a subtle shift in the air, like walking into a room that remembers too much. Corporal Weiss reported seeing lights in the windows across the street, flickers that moved as if someone were carrying a lantern. Reiner dismissed it at first. Reflections, he said. The wind plays tricks on the eyes. But the men were no longer sure what tricks belonged to the wind and what belonged to the place itself. Camera pans slowly down the village street. Snow drifts in spirals, forming faint shapes that dissolve when the wind changes. They began to search again, methodically this time, house by house. Every room told the same story. Life interrupted mid-breath. A meal a kettle still warm. In one house, a piano key was pressed down, stuck there, humming a single note that seemed to vibrate through the air like a heartbeat. A faint, continuous piano note, low and haunting, blending with the wind. Private Adler found a photograph lying face down near the fireplace. When he turned it over, he froze. It showed a family, a man, a woman, 2 children, standing in front of the same house he was standing in now. But their faces were blurred, as if water had smeared them away. He slipped it into his pocket without saying a word. Sergeant Kruger, searching the next house, found a diary on the kitchen table. The last entry was dated 1939. It spoke of the approaching war, of soldiers seen nearby, of fear, but the words ended mid. The ink trailed off as if the writer's hand had been pulled away. Softly, by midday, the men gathered near the church again. No birds, no tracks, no sign of life. Only those fires that refused to die down. Steady.com, eternal. Reiner ordered the fires extinguished. He wanted to restore reason to the moment, to feel control again. But as soon as they doused one, another would flare to life in the next house over. burning with the same steady flame. Visual. The men moving from house to house, their breath forming clouds, torches flickering. Behind them, fires reignite in windows they just left dark. Private Hoffman, the youngest of them, swore he heard children laughing behind the old schoolhouse. He ran toward the sound, shouting, calling out in German, his rifle swinging loosely in his hands. The others followed, but when they reached the schoolyard, it was empty. Only a swing swayed in the wind, creaking softly. Snow covered the ground completely. No footprints. Soft creak of metal chain, rhythmic, lonely. That was when Reiner's discipline began to crack. He ordered everyone back to the town hall. Radios unpacked, and coordinates transmitted. The operator, Feldman, turned the dials carefully. The machine hissed with static, caught faint signals, then fell silent. He tried again, same result. On the third attempt, the radio crackled, and a voice came through, distant, broken, filled with static. No one could understand the words, but it sounded German. And yet, the cadence was wrong. Slower, like someone repeating words they had learned long ago. Reiner leaned in. Identify yourself. No response. Just that same strange, deliberate breathing over the radio. Then faintly a whisper, you should not be here. Sudden burst of static. Sharp, loud, then silence. Quietly, Feldman tore off his headset. His hands shook. For the first time, even Reiner didn't speak. Outside, the church bell tolled again, one deep, slow chime that came from nowhere. No one had rung it. The rope was still tied, yet its echo drifted through the air like a warning. Slow-motion shot of soldiers turning toward the church, their faces pale under the gray light. The men began to argue. Some wanted to leave immediately, to march back the way they came. Others insisted they had to understand what they had found. Maybe it was an illusion, a Soviet decoy, a trap meant to disorient them. But logic no longer fit the shape of what they were seeing. That evening the temperature dropped. Frost crawled up the windows. The fires still burned, but the air inside grew colder. Private Hoffman began muttering in his sleep, words no one recognized. When they tried to wake him, he wouldn't open his eyes. He only whispered over and over. They never left. Faint, overlapping whispers, layered, almost inaudible. Low, measured tone. They never expected what came next. At midnight, they heard footsteps again, not around them, but beneath them. Slow, deliberate steps, like someone pacing below the floorboards. The men froze. Reiner lifted his rifle, his eyes scanning the shadows. Then a sound from the corner. The door creaked open by itself. Cold air rushed in, and outside, every window in the village glowed faintly, as if lit from within. Black and white shot the village from above, every house glowing softly in the dark, fires flickering through empty glass. The snow had stopped falling. The world seemed to hold still, and for a moment, the men stood there, caught between fear and disbelief, between what they could see and what they knew should be impossible. Quietly, almost whispering, when they realized the truth, it was already too late. Because this wasn't just an abandoned village. It was a place caught between moments where the war never ended, and the people never left. The wind returns. Louder now, the faint echo of distant voices, prayers, shouts, laughter blending into one mournful hum, fade to black. The screen flickers like old film burning through a projector reel. The sky turned to fire. Fire over the horizon. A pale gray dawn bleeds across the horizon. Snow drifts through the ruins of a once living street. The camera glides slowly over frozen rooftops, then downward to the soldiers huddled near the church, their eyes hollow from a night without rest. Soft, reflective, almost whispering. By the third day, the village no longer felt like part of the world. It was as though they had stepped outside of time itself. Radios no longer found signals. Compasses spun. The sun rose, but it gave no warmth. And the men, tired, half-starved, lost between orders and instinct, began to feel that the war had ended everywhere except here. Sound. Faint rustle of wind through cracked shutters. A single crow calling far away, then silence. Captain Reiner stood at the edge of the square, his boots sunk deep into snow. His breath hung in the air like smoke from a dying engine. He didn't speak much anymore. Whatever authority he had left was now only habit, a rhythm of command that kept his men from collapsing into fear. Private Hoffman hadn't woken since the night before. He lay by the fire, murmuring names no one recognized, his fingers twitching as if counting something unseen. Corporal Weiss sat beside him, reading the same page of a prayer book over and over, his lips barely moving. A log shifts in the fire, sending sparks into the air. The faint creak of the church door swaying in the wind. It was Kruger who noticed it first, a faint orange glow far beyond the tree line, toward the east. At first they thought it was sunrise, but the sun doesn't rise like that. Too fast, too fierce. Reiner brought up his binoculars. Through the fog, he saw something burning beyond the horizon. A fire, massive, slow-moving, unnatural, visual. Camera pans to distant horizon, the faint outline of flames flickering behind the forest. The light reflecting in the men's eyes. He ordered the men to pack their gear. We move out, he said. We find the source. Anything was better than staying another night in that place. They moved cautiously, rifles raised, snow crunching beneath their boots. The forest ahead looked skeletal, black trees stripped of bark, leaning inward as though listening. The orange light grew stronger with every step. Sound, boots on snow, wind rising, the faint crackle of distant fire, slow, like the world exhaling. When they broke through the tree line, they stopped. Lower tone, where the horizon should have been, there was fire, but not in the way they had seen it on battlefields. This fire did not spread or consume. It hovered, a line of flame stretching across the valley, motionless, burning without smoke, without sound. It cast a light that seemed to come from nowhere, touching the snow but leaving it unmelting. Reiner lowered his binoculars. No explosions, no gunfire, no movement, just fire, silent, patient, eternal. The men began to whisper among themselves. Was it artillery? A Soviet weapon? A chemical blaze? None of it made sense. The war had taught them to recognize destruction, but this was something different. A low hum builds under the narrator's voice, like distant machinery buried underground. They stood there for several minutes, mesmerized by the glow. Then Private Adler pointed at something moving within it, dark figures, faintly visible through the flame, walking slowly in a straight line. Reiner tensed. "Identify yourselves," he shouted in German. No reply. Only the slow, rhythmic movement of silhouettes. A column of soldiers, maybe 20 or 30, walking straight into the light and vanishing. Kruger took a step forward, raising his rifle. "They're ours," he muttered. They looked like he stopped. His voice caught in his throat, because as the figures drew closer to the edge of the light, their faces became visible, pale, gray, expressionless. Uniforms tattered, helmets shattered, and where eyes should have been, nothing but hollow black. Heartbeat thuds once, slow, deep. They never expected what came next. Without warning, the fire flared bright enough to blind them. When their vision cleared, the figures were gone. The valley lay empty. The horizon burned softly once more, indifferent, unchanging. Reiner ordered them to fall back immediately, but when they turned around, the path through the trees had vanished. The snow showed no footprints, theirs or anyone else's. Panic began to spread. Weiss started shouting that they'd been walking in circles. Feldman dropped his pack, screaming at the compass, spinning uselessly in his hand. Kruger knelt in the snow, muttering, "It's not fire, it's memory." Camera circles the men as they argue, the flames behind them reflecting on their faces, making their eyes look hollow and haunted. Softly, it was then that they heard it faint, at first, then clearer. The sound of marching, boots striking frozen ground in perfect rhythm, coming from somewhere deep within the light. Reiner raised his rifle, his breath sharp in the air. The sound drew closer, invisible ranks moving in formation. And then, through the fire, the glint of helmets, Stahlhelms, German helmets. He froze. Synchronized marching grows louder, rhythmic, mechanical, echoing through the snow. Out of the haze stepped a single figure. He wore the same uniform as Reiner's men, same insignia, same rank markings, but his skin was pale as chalk. His eyes, when they met Reiner's, held nothing. No fear, no recognition, only emptiness. Reiner whispered, "Identify yourself." The figure stared for a moment, then raised his hand in a slow salute, and as the fire flared once more, he and the others disappeared into the light, leaving only the sound of marching, fading slowly into silence. Marching fades, wind returns. Snow begins to fall again, softly, endlessly. In the silence that followed, the men realized they could no longer hear the world beyond the village. No distant artillery, no engine, not even the faint hum of life. It was as if the front and the war itself had ended, leaving them behind. Reiner ordered a retreat. They stumbled back toward where the village should have been, but when they emerged from the trees, they found it gone. No rooftops, no steeple, only white emptiness stretching in every direction. Camera pans across empty valley, snow untouched, fog curling like smoke. The sound of static returns, faint and steady, whispering when they realized the truth, it was already too late. Because some places in war are not meant to be entered. Some villages do not belong to maps, or to time, and those who find them never truly leave. Faint static overtakes the audio. The last frame flickers, firelight reflected in snow, then cuts to black. Shadows beneath the sea, the screen flickers like a damaged reel. Faint static lines crawl across the image, as if the film itself resists being shown. Then slowly clarity returns. The scene reveals the remnants of the patrol, 6 men now, stumbling through endless snow beneath a sky the color of lead. Quiet, pensive tone. By the time they realized the village had vanished, their sense of direction was gone with it. The land stretched in every direction, white, silent, infinite. The fire on the horizon had dimmed to a dull glow, and the sound of marching was only memory. Reiner marked their coordinates in his notebook, though he knew it was pointless. There was nothing left to navigate by. No roads, no signs. Not even the wind seemed to care which way it blew. A low hum beneath the wind, like the far-off murmur of machinery buried deep below the earth. They walked until dusk, their boots sinking into snow that grew strangely soft like ash instead of ice. Feldman swore he could hear water beneath it, a slow, rhythmic slosh, as though they were walking across a frozen lake. But the maps had shown no lakes in this region, none at all. The camera follows their boots. The snow shifts faintly beneath each step, leaving ripples instead of prints. As night fell, they found what looked like the remains of an old dock half buried in ice-weathered planks, ropes stiff with frost, and what appeared to be the outline of a small wooden boat frozen into the surface. The boat was empty, split down the middle, but its hull was dry as though it had never touched water. Captain Reiner ran a gloved hand along the wood, then paused. Beneath the frost, carved into the side, were the same words they'd seen in the church. Fur die, die, Niemals Jin. For those who never left, the creak of ice, a faint, hollow gurgle beneath their feet. Lower Kruger crouched down, pressing his ear to the surface. After a long silence, he whispered, "There's something moving under us." At first, no one believed him. Then the ground shifted a slow, heavy thud from below, as if something vast had turned in its sleep. The men froze. Weiss shouted that it must be a river current, but there was no current this far inland. Deep, low rumble. Ice cracking softly, spreading in fine white lines like They backed away, rifles raised. Reiner tried to steady his breath, but the air itself seemed thicker. Every exhale came out in short bursts. The horizon blurred. Then, through the rising fog, shapes began to form. Figures, dozens of them standing motionless across the ice. At first, the men thought they were trees, blackened by frost. But as they drew closer, they saw faces pale, sunken, eyes closed. The figures stood chest-deep in the ice, uniforms half visible beneath a glassy surface. Some wore Soviet coats, others, German, all of them frozen as though they had been reaching for something that was never there. Slow dollies shot across the ice, pale faces beneath the surface, hands outstretched, mouths slightly open, soft, solemn. These were not just the dead. They were the forgotten, the soldiers who vanished between fronts, reported missing, never buried. The sea beneath them was not made of water, but of time itself, holding everything the world refused to remember. Reiner fell silent. For a moment, he almost saluted. Then the ice cracked again, louder this time, a deep echo that rolled through the valley like thunder. Sharp crack. A low rising hum like the deep growl of an approaching storm. One of the men alert stepped back, his boots slipping. The ice gave way beneath him. He vanished into the dark. His scream echoed once, then cut off. They rushed forward, shining their torches down into the hole. The beam revealed nothing but blackness, no water, no bubbles, no sound, just depth. Endless, perfect depth. Flashlight clicks. The hum beneath grows louder, more rhythmic, almost like breathing. The ice around them began to move. Not crack but shift, rising and falling like waves. Something vast stirred below, something that had been waiting. Weiss shouted that they had to run, but Reiner hesitated, his eyes fixed on the faint glow returning beneath the surface. Light, warm, golden, like the fires in the village. And then, slowly, the faces beneath the ice began to open their eyes. Close-up of frozen faces, lids parting, eyes milky white, staring upward through the frost. Feldman screamed. The others turned and fled, slipping and crashing through snow, their breath ragged. Behind them, the ice pulsed with light waves of it rippling outward, illuminating the valley in ghostly flashes. Somber, quiet. They never expected what came next. As they ran, the fog thickened. The glow behind them dimmed, but the sound followed on echo of voices rising from below the ice. It wasn't screaming or words, just a low, mournful chant like a choir without air. The kind of sound that doesn't pass through ears, but straight into the bones. By the time they stopped running, the dock was gone. The shapes beneath the ice were gone. The horizon had closed in again, white, empty, silent. Wind fades, replaced by the faint ticking of a clock again. When they finally set up camp, no one spoke. Reiner wrote briefly in his notebook, his handwriting unsteady, the ink smudged by frost. Only one line could be read clearly. "If we are found, tell them we saw the bottom of the world." Close-up of the notebook, the ink freezing into tiny black cracks across the paper. Softly in the silence that followed, even the snow seemed to hold its breath. The men huddled together, rifles across their knees, waiting for dawn that might never come. And somewhere far below, beneath the ice, something moved once, more slow, patient, endless. Faint rumble, fading gradually into static. The camera slowly tilts upward, showing the endless white sky. Somewhere in the archives of World War II history, there's a report dated February 1944, stamped as incomplete. It describes a German reconnaissance patrol that failed to return. The coordinates place them in a region where no lakes are recorded, no villages, nothing but forest and snow. The file ends with 2 words, typed in faded ink, unrecoverable terrain. Black screen, faint sound of water dripping, echoing, then almost a whisper. And yet, in the stillness of forgotten war footage, when the reel catches the light just right, some say you can see it, the faint outline of a village reflected in ice. Waiting, the turning tide. The screen fades in from total black. The sound of a reel spinning slowly fills the silence, that soft, mechanical hum that feels both alive and artificial. A faint hiss of static precedes the first image, a snow-covered ridge. Pale dawn light just beginning to bleed through the clouds. The soldiers are shadows now, their outlines softened by exhaustion. Low, steady tone. By morning, their rations had frozen solid, their radio refused to spark, and the compass needle spun without rest. Reiner tried to gather His men? But their eyes no longer met his. Feldman muttered prayers beneath his breath, hands shaking. Weiss had stopped speaking altogether. It was as if the storm had stolen their language, replaced it with silence. Faint clinking of metal, boots crunching ice, the distant crackle of wind scraping over rock. They moved toward the rising sun, or what they thought was east, guided only by instinct and the thin promise of light. Each step felt heavier, as though gravity itself had deepened. The snow grew darker in patches, not from shadow, but from something seeping upward through it. Kruger was the first to notice the smell. Faint, metallic scent implied through tone, the sharpness of rust and old seawater. He said it reminded him of the docks at Kiel. Oil, salt, and the faint sweetness of decay. But this was inland, hundreds of miles from any sea. Reiner ignored it at first, focusing instead on keeping the line straight, on maintaining order, on pretending that this was still a mission and not a slow descent into something unspeakable. Then Weiss shouted. Camera whipped to Weiss kneeling, his gloved hand brushing snow away. Beneath it, a shape the curved edge of metal, dull gray, half buried in ice. Quietly, it was steel. Hull plating, riveted, corroded, cold to the touch. Reiner knelt beside him, brushing away frost until a number appeared, faint, almost erased. U-977, a submarine. But the U-977 had been reported missing off the coast of Norway, thousands of kilometers from where they now stood. Sound, the distant groan of shifting metal, low and deep, echoing through the valley. They dug for hours. The more they unearthed, the less sense it made. The submarine's hull was intact, embedded vertically in the ice like a blade plunged into the earth. Its conning tower jutted out at an impossible angle, covered in frost and silence. When they climbed closer, they found the hatch half open, frozen in place. A thin layer of frost clung to the edges, as if it had been sealed from the inside. Reiner ordered them to stay alert. He climbed first, boots clanging against metal, breath heavy inside helmets, distant wind howling through hollow steel corridors. Inside, the air was still stale and heavy with the scent of machine oil, and something older. Flashlights cut through the darkness, revealing narrow passageways lined with gauges and valves. The walls were covered in frost, the dials still frozen at half, but there were no signs of struggle, only coats and boots left neatly in place. And on one bunk, a journal. Reiner's gloved hand picking up a frost-covered notebook, pages stiff, corners curled, a few words visible beneath the ice. Reading softly, surface lost, depth unknown. The sea no longer moves. I hear them outside. He turned another page. Day 19. No sunrise, no horizon. The water is made of mirrors. The creak of metal, faint, dripping, echoing down the hall, growing slower and slower. Darker tone. The last entry simply read, "We surfaced in snow." No date, no coordinates. Just those words. Reiner closed the journal and stared into the corridor beyond, and for a moment he swore he saw movement. A figure at the end of the hall, back turned, wearing the dark coat of a Kriegsmarine officer. He called out. The figure didn't move. Reiner stepped forward, the beam of his flashlight trembling, and then the light flickered. When it came back, the corridor was empty. Slow rise of static, the heartbeat-like thump of the submarine's hull expanding in the cold. They left the U-boat by dusk. None of them spoke of what they'd seen. Feldman claimed he heard tapping from inside the metal as they climbed out. 3 knocks, evenly spaced, like a code. Weiss said it was the sound of the ice settling, but Kruger didn't answer. He just stared at the horizon, eyes wide, whispering we're under the sea. No one corrected him, because by then, the sky above had begun to move slow waves of dark color, rippling like the ocean's surface viewed from below. The world had turned upside down, and the line between water and air was gone. Low frequency, rumble, mixed with faint sonar pings, dissonant and fading. .com. Reflective. Later records found in German archives mention U-977 again, not in naval logs, but in a handwritten addendum marked anomalous recovery, do not pursue. It described a hull found in 1950, far inland, containing no human remains but covered in salt residue, as if it had spent decades underwater. The report was classified, sealed, and never spoken of again. Camera panned slowly upward, showing a frozen submarine beneath layers of ice, its periscope reaching toward a pale sun, trapped forever. For Reiner and his men, that discovery marked the turning tide. From that point onward, the war they thought they knew ceased to exist. Maps meant nothing. Orders meant nothing. The front lines were gone, replaced by something ancient, buried, and patient. Something that had been watching them long before the first bullet of the war was ever fired. A slow fade into the faint hum of Morse code. The message repeating, over and over, unintelligible but rhythmic. Then silence. Softly, when the storm finally cleared, only 3 men remained, and even they no longer believed they were on the same Earth they had started from. The forgotten orders a washed-out dawn. The sky looks bruised, pale, violet, bleeding into gray. Snow covers everything, the U-boat, the valley, the remnants of their camp. The air hangs, still, too still. The world seems paused between one heartbeat and the next. Soft, distant, by the 6th day, they stopped counting time. Watches had frozen. The sun no longer moved in any direction that made sense. The compass spun. The radio hummed with static. But every few hours, through the noise, a signal broke through. Short bursts of code, faint as breathing. Static crackle. Then faint Morse, tapping, dot dash, dot dot. Then silence. At first they thought it was command, Berlin, maybe, or a nearby outpost calling them home. Reiner scribbled down what he could decipher, half believing it was hope. The message repeated every hour, always the same, stand by for orders. But the coordinates that followed led them in circles. Black and white footage of the men trudging through snow, helmets frosted, faces hollow. Their boots sink deep with each step. Fog moves like smoke between the trees. They marched toward those signals as if pulled by a string. Every hill they climbed revealed another valley, identical to the one before. Each path returned to the same frozen crossroads, where the signpost had no letters left to read. Feldman began to talk in his sleep, whispering to someone who wasn't there. Weiss refused to remove his gloves, even to eat, claiming he could feel a pulse under the snow, like something alive, waiting. Faint rumble in the distance, like a train passing deep underground, lower tone. On the seventh night, they found the church again. The same steeple, the same broken bell, the same door half open. It shouldn't have been possible they had traveled for 2 days in the opposite direction, but there it was, standing quietly under the moonlight, its roof sagging under the weight of ice. Reiner ordered them inside. Candlelight flickers against walls lined with old photographs. Dust hangs in the air like falling snow. Every bench is empty. On the altar sits a single object, a field radio, humming faintly, its power lights still glowing. Slowly, it was identical to their own, same model, same markings, same code scratched into the metal. But when they turned it on, it spoke first. Sound, crackling radio. Then, faintly, a voice, male, monotone, familiar. Radio voice, stand by for orders. Unit Reiner, report position. Reiner froze. That was his own voice. He reached for the dial, turned it down, then up again. The voice repeated, identical in tone, in rhythm, in breath. Weiss crossed himself. Feldman whispered, we're already reporting. Static swelling, then cutting abruptly to silence. They waited, staring at the lifeless box. Then, slowly, the speaker crackled once more. Radio voice distorted, abandon the village. It is not yours. And then nothing. Radio hum fading, replaced by the echo of the wind outside. Distant wolves, or something that sounded like them, howling through the hills. Softly, when they stepped back into the cold, the entire valley had changed. The village gone. No houses, no smoke. Only open snowfields where the roofs had been. Even their footprints from hours before were gone. They stood in a white emptiness, unable to tell where the ground ended and the sky began. Slow, deep, heartbeat, like thud beneath the snow. Kruger fell to his knees, clawing at the frozen ground. Beneath the ice, he found something solid. Stone foundations, door frames, the skeletal remains of walls, long buried. The village had been there once. Centuries ago, maybe, but it had been erased, long before the war ever reached this part of Europe. Later, historians would find records of a settlement called Grunthal, burned during the Great War after an outbreak of plague. It was marked condemned, abandoned, never rebuilt. But that didn't explain what Reiner's men saw, or what they found. Visual. Reiner kneeling in the snow, staring at a rusted plaque unearthed by his shovel. The letters are half faded, but still legible. Grunthal -1917. Quietly, they never expected what came next. As the wind began to rise, the snow shifted and shapes began to appear within it. Not solid, not human. More like impressions. Shadows where people should have been. A woman holding a lantern, a child at her side, the glow of a fire that burned but gave no warmth. Reiner didn't give an order. There was nothing left to order. He simply turned toward the horizon, toward what he hoped was west, and began to walk. The others followed. Footsteps fading into snow, the low hum of wind like a whispering choir. No one knows how far they went after that. The last page of Reiner's journal ends mid. His handwriting trails off, as though he was interrupted or simply stopped existing. What is known comes from a Soviet patrol that entered the same valley weeks later. They found nothing. No equipment, no bot, only a single field radio, still running on its last battery, repeating the same message on a dying loop. Faint radio echo, distorted, endless. Stand by for orders. Stand by for orders. Stand by. Static overtakes the screen. The radio light flickers, then fades out completely. Somberly, somewhere in the archives of the German army, there remains a blank entry, a date with no report, a patrol with no return. The coordinates were never confirmed. The names were erased, but the valley remained silent, unclaimed, unrecorded. Faint wind, like distant voices murmuring beneath it. Soft. Final line for the section? And so the war went on across fields and oceans, through cities and trenches, but in one forgotten corner of Europe, a handful of men disappeared into a place that time itself refused to remember. Silence after fire-black screen. A low crackle of static, then slow dissolve into an aerial shot of endless snowfields under a colorless dawn. The camera drifts soundlessly, as if it's following something that no longer leaves footprints. Soft, reflective. They say the war ended in 19... But But not for everyone. For some, the front never closed, it just grew quieter. The rifles stopped firing, the banners were torn down, but their echoes lingered in places the maps forgot. Faint wind moaning through empty valleys. The rhythmic squeak of boots in deep snow, each step slower, heavier, fading. For Lieutenant Reiner and his men, silence became their final battlefield. After the last transmission, the storm returned. Sudden, violent, almost deliberate. Snow came from every direction at once, swallowing the horizon. Visibility dropped to nothing. The sound of their own breathing became the only measure of life. They tried to stay together, roped at the waist so none would vanish in the white. But one by one, the rope slackened. The storm took Kruger first, a scream cut short by wind. Feldman went next, his shape disappearing into the blur like a photograph burning away. Faint roar of wind, layered with soft whispering voices that seemed to ride within it. Quieter. By nightfall, only Reiner and Weiss remained. They found a hollow beneath a dead tree and lit what was left of their fuel. The flame was small, just enough to paint their faces in trembling orange. Two soldiers hunched near the fire. Snowflakes drift down from the branches above, melting on their shoulders. Their faces are gray, hollow-eyed, half-shadowed. Weiss stared into the flames for a long time before speaking. Weiss' faint voice, "Do you think we ever left the sea?" Reiner didn't answer. He couldn't, because somewhere deep inside, he'd begun to wonder the same thing. The air tasted like salt. The snow hissed when it touched the fire as though it carried traces of brine. He thought of the U-boat, the frozen hatch, the tapping beneath the ice. He thought of the radio that spoke with his own voice, of the church that waited for them no matter which way they walked. And he realized whatever this place was, it didn't care who they were or what uniform they wore. It wasn't part of the war. It was older, watching, waiting for something to return. Slow, distant creaking like a ship hull under pressure, echoing through the valley. Somber tone. When morning came, Reiner woke to find Weiss gone. His rifle lay beside the fire, frost glinting along the barrel. The snow was smooth around him. No tracks, no signs of struggle, only silence. Reiner, alone now, walking through a white wasteland. The wind has stopped. No sound at all. Just the faint crunch of his boots. He walked for hours or maybe days, until he reached a ridge overlooking the valley. From there, he saw everything at once. The faint outline of the church, the ghostly rooftops of the village, half buried again. And beyond that, the shadow of the submarine, protruding from the snow like a monument to something that should never have existed. The sky above it shimmered faintly like light refracted through water. Low-frequency hum, mixed with distant Morse code, repeating, distorted. He raised his binoculars, cracked, fogged, and for the briefest moment, saw figures moving in the streets below. Soldiers in gray coats, helmets gleaming faintly. They walked in formation, rifles on shoulders, marching through the same streets his patrol had walked days before. He recognized one of them, the way he limped, the way his scarf was tied. It was himself. Heartbeat fades in, slow, heavy, irregular. Quietly, he lowered the binoculars. The figures vanished. Only snow remained. He sat down in the drift, took out his notebook, and began to write his final entry, not to command, not to history, but to whoever might find this frozen ghost of a place. Close-up of his hand trembling as he writes. Ink freezes mid, reading softly. If anyone finds this, we followed orders. We found the village, but it was waiting for us. It always was. The sea is beneath the snow. Faint pen scratching, then silence. Reflective, fading. He placed the notebook inside his coat, closed his eyes, and leaned back against the tree. Snow began to fall again, gentle this time, almost kind. Within minutes, he was covered. Within hours, gone. Wide shot the snowfield stretching to the horizon, empty, untouched. The faint outline of a helmet barely visible under the surface. Years later, when Soviet surveyors crossed the same ridge, they found no sign of battle, no wreckage, no village, no men. Only a rusted German field radio half buried in ice, still powered by a corroded battery. When they turned it on, a voice whispered through the static. Radio faint, echoing. Stand by for orders. Fade to black. The sound lingers, hollow and distant, like a ghost trapped in the machine. Quietly, closing the section, in the silence that followed, the war finally ended. Not with victory, but with forgetting. What time couldn't erase a reel of damaged film begins to play. Frames burned at the edges, flickering in uneven rhythm. The screen shows snow drifting over a forgotten valley. No movement, no life. Only the faint hiss of wind moving through what once was. Soft, low, reflective. In the decades that followed, no one ever found Grunthal again. The coordinates led to forests, to open fields, to silence. It was as if the earth itself had swallowed the valley whole, covering the wound so completely that history could pretend it was never there. Faint static layered beneath the wind, as though an old radio were still searching for a signal that no longer exists. In archives across Berlin and Moscow, fragments remain unsigned reports. Brief transmissions, fragments of personal letters written by men who vanished. A line here, a date there, enough to suggest a story, but never enough to confirm one. The names of Reiner, Weiss, Feldman, Kruger, none appear on any casualty lists. Officially, they never served. They were ghosts before they ever disappeared. Blurred photographs on an old desk, edges curled with time, the ink smudged by moisture, the faces indistinct. And yet, every few years, someone reports hearing it. A signal on an abandoned frequency, buried beneath layers of static, a faint voice repeating the same words. Stand by for orders. It always ends the same way. A long pause, followed by 3 faint knocks. The knocks echo softly, slow, deliberate, and fade. Gentle, melancholy. The war scattered countless souls across continents, across oceans. Some were buried in graves. Others were left unmarked, unnamed. But some, it seems, never left at all. When German soldiers found that abandoned village, they didn't just discover a place. They uncovered something that time had tried to forget. A fracture. A mirror in the snow. A reminder that not everything lost in war was ever truly found. Slow pan across the empty valley. The light dims, as though dusk is falling again. Snow covers everything like a shroud. And perhaps that's what history is. A collection of absences. Of things we almost remembered, of names we almost spoke. Every archive, every film reel, every fading photograph, is just an attempt to reach through the silence and find what time couldn't erase. Faint, distant piano, slow, solitary notes echoing like drops of water. Softly, maybe Reiner and his men never left the valley. Maybe the valley never existed. Or maybe in some quiet corner of the past, sealed away by snow and static, they're still marching, still following orders that no longer matter, still standing by, silhouettes of soldiers walking through fog, fading one by one. Their shapes dissolve into mist, leaving only falling snow. They never expected what came next, but when they realized the truth, it was already too late. Wind dies down. The faint hum of a radio begins to fade, the final words whispering through static. Radio barely audible. Stand by for orders. Film burns out. The screen flickers white, then black. Final line, almost a whisper, and in the silence that followed, history looked away.